Violent gusts of wind carried dust across the barren plains as Virginia Blackwood clutched her swollen belly, her trembling fingers gripping the edge of the weathered wagon. The last of her meager supplies had dwindled to nothing but a half-empty canteen and a small sack of cornmeal. At 22, widowed and 7 months pregnant, she had journeyed west with dreams that were rapidly turning to dust just like the trail behind her. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life in Colorado Territory seemed more distant with each passing day. The wheel of her wagon had finally given out completely 3 miles back, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere with night approaching. Virginia had managed to guide her exhausted mare to a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek bed that still held a trickle of water despite the summer's heat. As she struggled to make camp, she fought back tears. She would not cry. Thomas had not married a weak woman, and even in death, she would not dishonor his memory with despair. "Just you and me now, little one," she whispered to her unborn child, rubbing her rounded belly. "But we'll find our way." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her freeze. Out here, strangers could mean salvation or doom. Virginia reached for the small revolver tucked in her boot. Thomas's parting gift before pneumonia had claimed him back in Missouri. She positioned herself behind the wagon, one hand on her weapon, the other protectively covering her child. A lone rider appeared through the dust, tall in the saddle atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The man pulled up 20 yards from her camp, raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "Hello, the camp," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "Mind if I approach? Looks like you might be in some trouble." Virginia kept her hand on the revolver. "State your business, sir." The stranger removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair was tied back, and several days' worth of stubble covered his strong jaw. "Name's Matthew Ryder, madam. I run cattle about 10 miles north of here. Saw your wagon while tracks veering off the main trail and thought someone might need assistance." Something in his straightforward manner made Virginia relax slightly, though she didn't lower her weapon. "My wheel broke. I'm headed to Silverdale." Matthew's eyes took in her condition, the broken wagon, and her obvious solitude with a quick glance, but his expression revealed nothing but concern. "That's still 40 miles west, madam. Not a journey to make alone, especially in your condition." "I don't have much choice, Mr. Ryder." He dismounted carefully, still keeping his distance. "May I at least look at your wagon? I've fixed my share of broken wheels." Virginia hesitated, then nodded, keeping the revolver visible. Matthew approached the wagon and inspected the damage, occasionally glancing at Virginia with a mixture of respect and concern. "Axle split clean through. Won't be fixed with just tools," he finally announced. "Mrs. Blackwood." "Virginia Blackwood." "Mrs. Blackwood, night's coming fast, and these parts aren't safe after dark. Coyotes are the least of your worries. I have a ranch house with plenty of room. You'd be welcome to shelter there until we can get your wagon fixed properly." Virginia stiffened. "I don't know you, Mr. Ryder." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, lives at the ranch. She's a proper widow of 60 years who'd box my ears if I spoke out of turn to a lady. You'd be under her protection as much as my roof." The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and Virginia felt the baby kick as if offering an opinion. She was exhausted, hungry, and out of options. "I can pay for repairs and lodging," she said firmly. "I'm not looking for charity." A ghost of a smile touched Matthew's lips. "Wouldn't dream of offering any, madam. Now, can I help you gather your things? We should move quickly if we're to reach the ranch before full dark." Within the hour, Virginia found herself seated before Matthew on his stallion, her essential belongings tied in bundles behind them. Her mare followed on a lead rope, and they had secured the wagon as best they could until Matthew could return with proper equipment. As they rode through the twilight, Virginia felt strangely secure despite her predicament. Matthew kept a respectful distance as much as their shared saddle allowed, his arms reaching around her only to hold the reins. He spoke little, and when he did, it was to point out landmarks or warn of rough terrain ahead. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, a substantial 2-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. Lantern light glowed welcomingly from the windows, and as they approached, the front door opened to reveal a stout woman with silver hair and an expression of startled concern. "Matthew Ryder, who have you brought home at this hour?" she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she hurried down the porch steps. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Mrs. Blackwood. Her wagon broke down miles back. She'll be staying with us until it can be repaired." The older woman's eyes widened as she took in Virginia's condition. Then her face softened with immediate understanding. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside this instant. You must be exhausted." Virginia allowed herself to be helped down from the horse and guided into the house, surprised by the comfortable furnishings and cleanliness within. The main room featured solid wooden furniture, braided rugs, and a stone fireplace where a small cooking fire burned. The smell of fresh bread and stew made her stomach growl audibly. "When did you last eat, child?" Mrs. Wilkins asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "This morning," Virginia admitted. "Well, that won't do for two, will it?" The housekeeper gestured to a chair at the large oak table. "Sit. Rest those feet. I'll have a bowl of stew for you in no time." Matthew entered carrying Virginia's belongings. "I'll put these in the spare room upstairs. Mrs. Wilkins will show you up when you're ready." "Thank you, Mr. Ryder," Virginia said formally, though gratitude flooded her voice. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll fetch your wagon tomorrow. Get some rest, Mrs. Blackwood." After he disappeared upstairs, Mrs. Wilkins placed a steaming bowl before Virginia, along with a thick slice of bread. "Eat now. Questions later." Virginia didn't need to be told twice. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, the best meal she'd had in weeks. As she ate, she gradually felt some of her tension ease. Mrs. Wilkins busied herself around the kitchen, occasionally glancing at Virginia with motherly concern. "How far along are you, dear?" she finally asked. 7 months, I believe." Mrs. Wilkins nodded knowingly. "And traveling alone? Your husband died of pneumonia 3 months ago," Virginia said quietly. "We were heading to Colorado to start fresh. His brother has land near Silverdale." The older woman clucked sympathetically. "And does this brother know you're coming?" Virginia stared into her bowl. "He doesn't know about Thomas. Or the baby. I've written, but I don't know if my letters reached him." Mrs. Wilkins sighed. "Well, you're safe now. Matthew's a good man, the best I know. Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Keeps to himself mostly, but he'll see you right." Virginia looked up sharply. "I don't intend to be a burden. Once my wagon is fixed." Nobody said anything about burdens. Mrs. Wilkins interrupted gently. "Now finish that stew, and I'll show you to your room. You need rest more than pride right now." The spare room was simple but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with fresh water, and a small window overlooking the ranch yard. After Mrs. Wilkins left her alone, Virginia sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had prided herself on her independence since Thomas's death, determined to reach his brother's homestead before the baby arrived. Now she found herself dependent on the kindness of strangers. Yet as she laid her head on the softest pillow she'd felt in months, Virginia allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps this unexpected detour was exactly what she needed. Morning came with the sounds of ranch life, cattle lowing in the distance, the clatter of pots in the kitchen below, men's voices calling to each other across the yard. Virginia dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, a simple blue cotton that strained against her growing belly. She pinned her long brown hair into a modest bun and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Wilkins was already busy at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Virginia admitted. "Can I help with anything?" "You can sit and eat," the housekeeper replied firmly. "Growing babies need nourishment." Virginia had just taken a seat when Matthew entered from outside, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. He'd clearly been working for hours already. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, removing his hat. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Virginia watched as he poured himself coffee. "Mr. Ryder, about my wagon. Already sent 2 of my men to bring it in. The wheel's beyond repair, but we can replace it. Might take a couple of days to get the parts we need." Virginia nodded, trying not to show her anxiety. Every day delayed was another day closer to her confinement. "I appreciate your help, but I insist on paying for the repairs and my board." Matthew's blue eyes met hers directly. "We'll discuss that when the time comes. For now, please make yourself comfortable." Mrs. Wilkins could use some company besides my sorry self. The housekeeper chuckled. That's the truth. Now both of you eat before this food gets cold. Breakfast passed with polite conversation, mostly led by Mrs. Wilkins, who seemed determined to ease the awkwardness between her employer and their unexpected guest. Virginia learned that the ranch, the Double R, was one of the more successful operations in the territory, with Matthew having built it from almost nothing over the past 10 years. He's too modest to say so, Mrs. Wilkins confided as Matthew excused himself to return to work, but he's respected by everyone from here to Denver. Fair to his men, honest in his dealings. Virginia watched through the window as Matthew strode across the yard, calling instructions to several cowboys who nodded respectfully. He seems capable, more than capable. That man could run this territory if he wanted to, but he's happy with his cattle and his land. Mrs. Wilkins gave Virginia a sidelong glance. He wasn't always so solitary, you know. Before Sarah and the baby died, this house was full of laughter. Virginia turned away from the window. It must have been difficult for him. Nearly destroyed him. Threw himself into work for 2 years straight. Barely spoke except to give orders. The housekeeper began clearing the breakfast dishes. He's better now, but something in him changed. Keeps people at a distance. Virginia thought of her own grief after losing Thomas, how the world had seemed to lose its color, how she'd forced herself to continue only because of the life growing inside her. Time helps, she said softly, but some wounds never fully heal. Mrs. Wilkins nodded sagely. True enough. Now, would you like to rest, or would you prefer something to occupy your hands? I've mending that needs doing if you're so inclined. Grateful for the opportunity to be useful, Virginia spent the morning helping with household tasks. Her fingers remembered the rhythm of needle and thread as she repaired shirts and linens, finding comfort in the simple, productive work. By midday, she felt more settled than she had in months. After lunch, she ventured onto the porch, needing fresh air. The ranch sprawled before her corrals where cowboys worked with horses, a large barn, and beyond, rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. She was so absorbed in the view that she didn't hear Matthew approach until he spoke. It's a fine piece of land. Virginia started slightly. It is beautiful. You've built something impressive here. He leaned against the porch railing, his eyes scanning his domain. Your wagon's in the barn. The axle needs replacing along with the wheel. I've sent one of my men to town for parts. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Matthew glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. What takes a woman in your condition on such a journey alone, Mrs. Blackwood? If you don't mind my asking. Virginia sighed, one hand automatically moving to her belly. Necessity, Mr. Ryder. After Thomas, my husband, died, there wasn't much left for me in Missouri. His brother has land near Silverdale. It seemed the best option for the baby's future. And this brother knows you're coming. I wrote to him, whether he received my letters. She shrugged slightly. Either way, I'll manage. Matthew studied her for a long moment. I admire your courage, Mrs. Blackwood, but Silverdale is rough country for a woman alone, especially with a child coming. I'm stronger than I look, she replied, a hint of defiance in her voice. The ghost of a smile touched his lips again. I don't doubt that for a moment. He straightened up. I need to check on the south pasture. Would you like to come along? The fresh air might do you good, and it would give you a chance to see more of the territory. Surprised by the offer, Virginia hesitated only briefly. I'd like that, if it's not an imposition. No imposition. I'll have the buggy brought around. The buggy was a well-maintained two-seater with a canvas top to provide shade. Matthew helped Virginia up with careful hands, then took the reins. As they pulled away from the house, he pointed out features of the ranch, the different pastures, the creek that provided water year-round, the distant line of trees that marked the property boundary. How many acres do you have? Virginia asked, genuinely interested. About 2,000 now. Started with just 100. There was quiet pride in his voice. Good water makes all the difference out here. As they drove, Virginia found herself relaxing in Matthew's company. He spoke knowledgeably about ranching, the local territory, and the challenges of the frontier. When they stopped on a rise overlooking a green valley where cattle grazed, the view took Virginia's breath away. It's magnificent, she said softly. Matthew nodded, his eyes on the horizon. This land gets in your blood, becomes part of you. I understand that. Thomas and I always dreamed of having our own place. Virginia's voice caught slightly. He was a dreamer, always looking to the horizon. Nothing wrong with dreams, Matthew said quietly, as long as you're willing to put in the work to make them real. A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out over the valley. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly energetic kick, making Virginia gasp and place her hand on her belly. Matthew looked concerned. Are you all right? Virginia smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given him. Yes, the baby's just reminding me of its presence. After a moment's hesitation, Matthew asked, May I? He gestured toward her belly. Surprised but not offended, Virginia nodded. Matthew placed his large, calloused hand gently on her rounded stomach. When the baby kicked again, his eyes widened with something like wonder. Strong little one, he said, withdrawing his hand almost reluctantly. Like its father, Virginia replied softly. Matthew's expression changed, becoming more guarded again. We should head back. Storm clouds building to the west. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, but not uncomfortably so. Virginia found herself studying Matthew's profile when he wasn't looking, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. There was something solid about him, dependable in a way that reminded her of the mountains themselves. By the time they returned to the ranch house, dark clouds were indeed gathering on the horizon. Mrs. Wilkins bustled out onto the porch, looking relieved to see them. There you are? I was starting to worry with that storm coming in. She helped Virginia down from the buggy. Come inside, dear. I've just pulled a batch of cinnamon bread from the oven. That evening, as rain pounded against the windows, Virginia sat in the cozy parlor with Mrs. Wilkins, working on a small blanket for the baby. Matthew had retreated to his study after dinner, where Mrs. Wilkins said he usually handled the ranch accounts in the evenings. He seems very dedicated to his work, Virginia observed. Mrs. Wilkins looked up from her knitting. Work is what saved him after Sarah died. Gave him purpose. She paused, then added carefully, You remind me of her a bit. She had that same quiet strength about her. Virginia wasn't sure how to respond to that. How long have you worked for Mr. Ryder? Since he first bought this place. My Harold had just passed, and I needed somewhere to go. Matthew needed someone to keep house. Been here ever since. The older woman's needles clicked rhythmically. Watched him build this ranch from nothing but hard work and determination. Watched him fall in love, start a family, and then lose it all. Watched him close himself off from the world. Virginia's hands stilled on her sewing. That must have been difficult to witness. Life deals hard hands sometimes. It's how we play them that matters. Mrs. Wilkins gave Virginia a meaningful look. You understand that, I think. Later that night, unable to sleep despite her comfortable bed, Virginia made her way downstairs for a glass of water. The house was quiet except for the fading sounds of the rain and the occasional creak of settling wood. As she passed the study, she noticed the door ajar and a soft light still burning within. She hesitated, then gently knocked. Mr. Ryder? I apologize for disturbing you. The door opened wider to reveal Matthew, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired but alert. Mrs. Blackwood, is everything all right? Yes, I just couldn't sleep and was getting some water. She gestured to the glass in her hand. You're up late as well. He stepped back, inviting her in with a gesture. Ranch accounts. Never my favorite task, but necessary. The study was warmly lit by an oil lamp, with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk covered with ledgers and papers. Virginia was surprised by the number of books, not what she expected in a cattleman's home. You enjoy reading, she observed. When there's time. Matthew closed one of the ledgers. My father was a schoolteacher before he tried his hand at ranching. Believed education was as important as knowing how to ride and shoot. Virginia ran her fingers along the spines of several volumes. My father was similar. He taught me to read Shakespeare before I could properly tie my shoes. Matthew looked at her with new interest. You're full of surprises, Mrs. Blackwood. As are you, Mr. Ryder. She pulled out a volume of Tennyson's poems. This was one of Thomas's favorites. Matthew watched as she carefully opened the book. Your husband had good taste. He did. Virginia returned the book to its shelf. We met at a literary society meeting in St. Louis. He was reciting Ulysses from memory. Rather badly, actually. The memory brought a smile to her face, but with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but be charmed. Matthew leaned against his desk. And now you're carrying his child to a new frontier. Life rarely follows the path we expect, Virginia said quietly. Thomas would have been a wonderful father. He was so excited when we learned about the baby. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Finally, Matthew straightened. You should try to rest, Mrs. Blackwood. The storm's passing, which means tomorrow will be busy. Virginia nodded, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment, standing in a man's private study in her nightgown and robe, sharing personal memories. Of course. Good night, Mr. Ryder. Matthew, he said unexpectedly. You might as well call me Matthew. Seems formal to keep up with Mr. Ryder when you're staying in my home. Virginia smiled softly. Then you must call me Virginia. Virginia, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Good night, then. As she made her way back upstairs, Virginia felt a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. She dismissed it firmly. Her focus needed to be on reaching Silverdale and establishing a life for her child. Anything else was a distraction she couldn't afford. The next week passed in an unexpected rhythm of ranch life. Virginia's wagon parts were delayed by washouts on the road to town, but she found herself less anxious about the delay with each passing day. She fell into the household routine, helping Mrs. Wilkins with cooking and mending, even taking over some of the account books when she revealed her facility with numbers. Matthew was often busy with ranch work, but he made a point to join the women for meals, and occasionally invited Virginia to accompany him on short rides around the property. Their conversations grew easier, spanning topics from literature to ranching techniques to the politics of the territory. Virginia discovered that beneath Matthew's reserved exterior was a thoughtful, intelligent man with strong convictions and a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch shelling peas while Mrs. Wilkins napped, Virginia found herself telling Matthew about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her move to Missouri after her parents died, and how she'd met Thomas. He swept me off my feet, she admitted with a small smile. So full of dreams and plans. We were going to build something wonderful together. Matthew's hands continued their steady work. And now, Virginia sighed. Now I have to build something for his child. Something stable and secure. Is that what you want? Security? The question caught her off guard. Isn't that what every mother wants for her child? Matthew looked at her directly. I'm asking what Virginia wants, not just the mother. For a long moment, Virginia was silent, considering. I want to not be afraid anymore, she finally said. To build a life where my child can thrive. Where I can be more than just someone's widow or someone's mother. Matthew nodded slowly. A worthy aim. And you? Virginia asked. What does Matthew Ryder want? He looked out across his land, his expression thoughtful. For a long time, all I wanted was to forget. To lose myself in work until the pain faded. He glanced at her. Now, I'm not entirely sure. Before Virginia could respond, one of the ranch hands came riding up, calling for Matthew. Some problem with cattle breaking through a fence line. Matthew excused himself, leaving Virginia with her thoughts and half a basket of peas. That evening, a small celebration erupted when the wagon parts finally arrived. The ranch hands built a bonfire in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. As simple food was shared and music filled the air, Virginia found herself drawn into the warmth of community that she hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri. Matthew approached as she watched the festivities from the porch steps. Would you care to dance? He asked, extending his hand. Virginia gestured to her belly. I'm hardly in dancing condition. A genuine smile transformed his face. I've never let a little challenge stop me before. Before she could protest further, he had gently pulled her to her feet and led her to the edge of the firelight. His arm went respectfully around her waist, keeping a proper distance while still supporting her. As they swayed to the fiddle's melody, Virginia felt a rush of emotions she'd thought long buried: joy, lightness, the simple pleasure of moving in harmony with another person. I haven't danced since before Thomas fell ill, she admitted quietly. Matthew's eyes reflected the firelight. You dance beautifully. When the music ended, Virginia found herself reluctant to step away. Matthew seemed equally hesitant, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, she said softly. Virginia, he began, then stopped as Mrs. Wilkins approached with a plate of food. "You need to eat, dear," the housekeeper insisted, casting a knowing glance between them. "Dancing for two is hungry work." The moment broken, Virginia accepted the plate gratefully. As she ate, she watched Matthew move among his men, exchanging words and laughs with easy camaraderie. He belonged here, in this life he'd built. And tomorrow, or the next day, her wagon would be repaired, and she would continue on to Silverdale, to whatever uncertain future awaited her there. The thought brought an unexpected pang of regret. Morning brought news that her wagon repairs were complete. Matthew delivered the information himself as Virginia helped Mrs. Wilkins prepare breakfast. "Jake says it's good as new. Better, even." He hesitated, then added, "Of course, there's no rush. The roads west are still muddy from the storm." Virginia felt conflicting emotions: relief that she could continue her journey, disappointment that her time at the Double R was ending. "That's wonderful news. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's been no imposition," Matthew said quickly. In fact, he glanced at Mrs. Wilkins, who suddenly became very interested in her biscuit dough. "In fact, I was hoping you might consider staying a bit longer. At least until the roads dry completely." Virginia's heart beat faster. "That's very kind, but the baby," Mrs. Wilkins interjected, abandoning all pretense of not listening. "You shouldn't be bouncing around in a wagon so close to your time. It's not safe." Matthew nodded. "Mrs. Wilkins is right. Silverdale will still be there in a few weeks." Virginia looked between them, suspecting an alliance. "And what would I do in the meantime? Continue to accept your charity?" "Not charity," Matthew said firmly. "I could use help with the accounts. You've shown quite a talent for it, and my bookkeeping has never been my strength." "He's telling the truth there," Mrs. Wilkins muttered, returning to her biscuits with a small smile. Virginia considered the offer. The thought of continuing her journey alone, now nearly 8 months pregnant, was daunting. And there was a certain comfort in the routine she'd established here, a sense of belonging she hadn't expected to find. "I would insist on earning my keep," she said finally. Matthew's face relaxed into a smile. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And so Virginia's temporary stay extended. The days fell into a pleasant pattern: mornings spent helping with household tasks, afternoons working on the ranch accounts in Matthew's study. Sometimes he would join her, their heads bent together over ledgers and supply lists, his presence a solid comfort beside her. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch watching the sunset, talking of books or memories or plans for the ranch. Virginia found herself opening up about her hopes and fears for the future, while Matthew gradually shared stories of his life before she arrived: his childhood in Illinois, his journey west as a young man, the joy he'd found with Sarah, and their brief time together. "She would have liked you," he said one evening, his voice soft with memory. Sarah believed in seeing the best in people, in second chances. Virginia felt oddly touched by the comparison. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Matthew looked at her directly. "As are you, Virginia Blackwood." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Virginia was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way the fading light caught the blue of his eyes. For a breathless moment, she thought he might reach for her hand, or perhaps even. The baby kicked hard, breaking the spell. Virginia gasped, her hand flying to her side. "Are you all right?" Matthew asked, concern replacing whatever had been in his eyes moments before. "Yes, just a strong kick." Virginia managed a smile. This child seems determined to make its presence known at the most inopportune moments. Later that night, lying awake in her bed, Virginia confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was developing feelings for Matthew Ryder. Feelings that complicated an already complex situation. She was a pregnant widow, still mourning her husband in many ways. He was a man who had lost his own family and built walls around his heart. And yet, there was something growing between them, something tentative and fragile, but undeniably real. The question was whether either of them was brave enough to acknowledge it. The next morning, Virginia awoke to unusual activity in the ranch yard. Looking out her window, she saw several wagons arriving, men and women unloading supplies and setting up tables. Mrs. Wilkins explained over breakfast. "It's the ranch's 10th anniversary. Matthew always hosts a gathering for the neighbors and hands, sort of a tradition since the early days." "He never mentioned it," Virginia said, surprised. The housekeeper exchanged a glance with Matthew, who looked slightly embarrassed. Didn't want you to feel obligated to help with preparations in your condition, he explained. Nonsense, Virginia replied firmly. I'm perfectly capable of helping. Just tell me what needs to be done. The day passed in a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for the celebration. Virginia found herself directing the arrangement of food tables, helping decorate the yard with lanterns, and even instructing some of the younger ranch hands on proper placement of benches and chairs. She was in her element, organizing and problem-solving, and more than once she caught Matthew watching her with a mixture of admiration and amusement. By late afternoon, guests began arriving, neighboring ranchers and their families, merchants from the nearby town, and various friends Matthew had made over the years. Virginia was introduced as Mrs. Blackwood, a friend staying with us for a time, and she was touched by how readily the community accepted her presence. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, multiple fiddles began playing, and the celebration truly began. Virginia found herself surrounded by friendly faces, engaged in conversations about everything from recipes to the territorial politics. Several of the women, noticing her condition, offered advice and support, sharing their own experiences of frontier motherhood with practical kindness. Virginia was resting on a bench, watching children play a game of tag, when an elegantly dressed woman approached. She was perhaps 40, with carefully styled blonde hair and an assessing gaze. "So you're the mysterious Mrs. Blackwood," the woman said, sitting beside Virginia without invitation. "I'm Elizabeth Palmer. My husband owns the bank in town. Pleased to meet you," Virginia replied politely. Elizabeth's eyes traveled over Virginia's pregnant form. "Matthew's been quite secretive about you. Now I understand why. When is your baby due?" Something in the woman's tone put Virginia on guard. "In about a month," the doctor thought. "How fortunate you found shelter here." Elizabeth's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Matthew's quite the gallant rescuer, isn't he? Though in the 5 years since Sarah died, he's never shown interest in any woman. Until now, apparently." Before Virginia could respond to this obvious fishing for information, Matthew appeared with 2 plates of food. "Elizabeth," he acknowledged with a nod. "I see you've met Virginia." "Indeed. We were just getting acquainted." Elizabeth stood, smoothing her expensive dress. "Your guest is quite charming, Matthew, though you might have mentioned her to old friends before now." After she walked away, Matthew handed Virginia a plate with an apologetic expression. "I should have warned you about Elizabeth. She's had designs on the double R and me since her first husband died 3 years ago." Virginia couldn't help a small laugh. "I gathered as much. She seems to think I'm some sort of threat." "Aren't you?" The words were quiet, almost inaudible above the music and chatter surrounding them. Virginia looked up, startled by the intensity in Matthew's eyes. Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Wilkins hurried over. "Matthew, the Miller boys are about to start that shooting contest you promised. You'd better get over there before someone puts a hole in your barn roof again." With a last lingering look at Virginia, Matthew excused himself. Mrs. Wilkins took his place on the bench, fanning herself vigorously. "That man," she muttered, "takes him forever to make up his mind, and then he chooses the most public moment possible to get romantic." Virginia nearly choked on her food. "Mrs. Wilkins." "Oh, don't Mrs. Wilkins me, child. I've seen how he looks at you. How you look at him when you think no one's watching." The older woman patted Virginia's hand. "Life's too short and too hard out here to deny joy when it comes your way." "It's complicated," Virginia protested weakly. "Love always is." Mrs. Wilkins stood with a groan. "Now, I need to check on those pies before someone walks off with all of them." Left alone with her thoughts, Virginia watched as Matthew organized the shooting contest, his easy authority and good humor evident as he set up targets and established rules. The men respected him, that much was clear. And the women Virginia, noted with a twinge of something that might have been jealousy, certainly admired him. As the evening progressed, Virginia found herself drawn into the celebration despite her conflicted emotions. She clapped along with fiddle tunes, laughed at stories of ranch mishaps, and even joined a circle dance that accommodated her unwieldy form with good-natured adjustments. When the dancing ended, Matthew appeared at her side. "Enjoying yourself?" "Very much," Virginia admitted. "Your neighbors are wonderful people. Most of them." His smile was warm in the lantern light. Would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you. Curious, Virginia allowed him to lead her away from the gathering, toward a small rise where a lone oak tree stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The sounds of the party faded behind them, replaced by the gentle chorus of night insects and the distant lowing of cattle. I come here sometimes when I need to think, Matthew explained as they reached the tree. Best view on the property. He was right. From this vantage point, the ranch house glowed with welcoming light, the yard filled with moving figures and the sparkle of lanterns. Beyond, the vast prairie stretched toward the mountains, silver touched by moonlight. It's beautiful, Virginia breathed. Virginia. Matthew's voice had a new note of determination. There's something I need to say. Her heart quickened. Yes. These past weeks, having you here. He hesitated, searching for words. The ranch feels different. More like a home again. Virginia stood very still, afraid to break the moment. Matthew. Please, let me finish. I know your plan was to continue to Silverdale, to your brother-in-law's place. But I want to offer you an alternative. He took a deep breath. Stay here, not as a guest or an employee, but as my wife. The words hung in the night air between them. Virginia felt dizzy with surprise, her hand automatically moving to support her belly. I know it's sudden, Matthew continued quickly, and I know you're still carrying another man's child. But I would raise that baby as my own, Virginia. Love it as my own. Matthew, she managed finally, you can't know what you're saying. We've barely known each other a month. I know enough. His voice was steady now. I know you're strong and intelligent and brave. I know you make this place feel alive again. I know that when you smile, I remember what happiness felt like. Tears welled in Virginia's eyes. I'm not Sarah. I don't want you to be. He stepped closer, his face solemn in the moonlight. I loved Sarah with everything I had. Losing her nearly destroyed me. I never thought I could feel anything like that again, never wanted to risk that kind of pain. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he gently took her hand. But then you appeared, stranded and determined, and carrying new life inside you. And something woke up in me that I thought was gone forever. Virginia's mind raced. This wasn't what she had planned. She'd been so focused on reaching Silverdale, on the security of family, however distant. Yet here was Matthew offering something she hadn't dared hope for, a real home, a partnership, a chance for her child to have a father. I need time, she whispered. This is so unexpected. Matthew nodded, releasing her hand. Of course. I don't expect an answer tonight. Just think about it. As they walked back toward the celebration, Virginia was acutely aware of the life growing inside her, of the responsibility she carried. Thomas would want her to be happy, to find security for their child. But was this the right path? Could she build a life with Matthew, knowing his heart still held memories of Sarah? Could he truly love another man's child as his own? The questions swirled in her mind as they rejoined the gathering, where the festivities continued, unaware of the momentous conversation that had just taken place under the oak tree. The day after the celebration dawned clear and warm. Virginia rose early, having slept little, her mind still processing Matthew's unexpected proposal. The house was quiet, everyone sleeping late after the festivities, giving her time alone with her thoughts. She found herself in the kitchen, automatically starting coffee and biscuits as she had each morning for weeks now. The familiar tasks soothed her, creating space for reflection. Matthew was offering her and her child a home, security, his name. It was more than most women in her situation could hope for. He was respected, established, kind. They got along well, enjoyed each other's company, shared interests and values. But was that enough for marriage? Virginia had married Thomas for love, impulsive, all-consuming love that had carried them through difficulties and uncertainties. What Matthew proposed felt different, more measured, perhaps more practical. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her when he looked at her, the comfort she found in his presence, the way her heart quickened when he entered a room. The back door opened, interrupting her thoughts. Matthew stood there, hat in hand, looking as though he too had slept little. "Good morning," he said softly. "You're up early." "So are you." Virginia gestured to the stove. "Coffee's almost ready." He nodded, setting his hat on the hook by the door. "About last night, Matthew." They both stopped, then smiled tentatively at each other. "Ladies first," Matthew said. Virginia took a deep breath. I've been thinking about your proposal. It's generous and unexpected, and I'm deeply touched. His expression remained carefully neutral. But marriage should be more than convenience or kindness. Virginia met his eyes directly. I won't enter into it unless we're both certain. Matthew stepped closer. What would make you certain, Virginia? The directness of the question caught her off guard. I need to know that this isn't just about providing for a widow in need. That you truly want us in your life. That you can see a future where we build something together, not just exist side by side. And if I told you that's exactly what I want. His voice was low, intense. That I didn't expect to find someone like you. But now that I have, I can't imagine letting you go. Virginia's heart pounded. I would need to believe that you've truly opened your heart again. That there's room there for new love, not just echoes of what you lost. Matthew was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes searching hers. Then he slowly reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. There's room, Virginia. I didn't think there would be, but there is. The tenderness in his touch undid her. Virginia closed her eyes, leaning slightly into his hand. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid of depending on someone again, of losing again. I know. His thumb traced a gentle path along her cheekbone. I am too. But maybe that's what courage is, being afraid and moving forward anyway. Virginia opened her eyes to find him watching her with such honest emotion that it took her breath away. I don't have an answer yet, she whispered. But I'm not saying no. The relief in his smile was palpable. That's enough for now. They were still standing close, his hand on her face, when Mrs. Wilkins bustled in. Well, it's about time, she declared, taking in the scene with obvious approval. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar together. Matthew dropped his hand, looking both embarrassed and amused. Good morning to you too, Mrs. Wilkins. Don't mind me, the housekeeper said, waving them away from the stove. You two keep talking. I'll see to breakfast. But the moment had shifted, returning them to the practical world of ranch morning routines. Matthew excused himself to check on the stock, promising to return for breakfast. As Virginia helped Mrs. Wilkins prepare the meal, she felt a curious lightness, as if some heavy burden had begun to lift from her shoulders. Over the next few days, a subtle change came over the household. Nothing was explicitly stated, but there was a new awareness between Virginia and Matthew, a sense of possibility that colored their interactions. They spoke more openly of the future, with Matthew occasionally including Virginia in discussions about ranch improvements or plans for the coming season. One afternoon, as Virginia sat on the porch mending a shirt, Matthew approached with an unusual request. Would you come with me? There's something I'd like you to see. Curious, Virginia set aside her sewing and followed him to the buggy. They drove past the barn and corrals, beyond the main pastures, to an area of the ranch Virginia hadn't visited before. A small creek ran through a grove of cottonwoods, creating a natural boundary for a gentle slope that faced the mountains. Matthew helped her down from the buggy and led her to the center of the clearing. What do you think of this spot? Virginia looked around, taking in the view, the pleasant sound of the creek, the shelter of the trees. It's lovely, peaceful. I've been thinking, Matthew said, his voice careful but determined, that the main house is getting crowded. With the ranch expanding, we often have extra hands staying over, visitors from town. It might be time to build a second house. Virginia's heart skipped a beat as she began to understand. A second house. A family home, Matthew clarified, watching her face. Separate from the business of the ranch, but close enough to oversee things. And you're thinking of building it here? Matthew nodded, gesturing to the surroundings. Good water from the creek. Protected from the north winds by those hills. View of the mountains from the front porch. He paused, then added more softly. Room for children to play. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about a new building, it was about a new beginning. A future he was hoping to share with her. It would be a wonderful place for a home, Virginia said, emotion making her voice unsteady. Matthew took her hand, his expression earnest. I want you to know I'm serious, Virginia. About you, about the baby, about building a life together. He squeezed her fingers gently. I'm not asking for your answer yet. I just wanted you to see that I'm planning for a future one I hope includes you. Virginia was deeply moved by the gesture, by the careful thought behind it. This wasn't an impulsive offer born of pity or obligation. Matthew had considered what a life together might look like, had found space on his beloved ranch where they could create something new together. "Thank you for showing me," she said sincerely. "It helps to see, to know that you've thought about these things." As they stood together in the clearing, Virginia could almost visualize it, a solid house with wide porches, flower beds along the path, perhaps a swing for the baby. A home of her own again, with a man who respected her, who saw her strength and her vulnerability and accepted both. The baby kicked vigorously, as if offering an opinion on the matter. Virginia laughed softly, placing Matthew's hand on her belly so he could feel the movement. "I think someone approves of the location," she said. Matthew's smile was warm as he felt the baby's activity. Smart child already. On the drive back to the main house, they spoke of practical things, the challenges of building before winter, the materials that would be needed, the best design for the harsh prairie climate. It was a conversation between potential partners, each offering ideas and listening to the other's perspective. Virginia found herself fully engaged, imagining solutions to problems, suggesting features that would make the house more livable. By the time they returned to the ranch yard, something had shifted. Virginia hadn't given Matthew her answer yet, but in her heart, she was beginning to believe that this unexpected detour might indeed be the path her life was meant to take. That evening after dinner, as Matthew retired to his study and Mrs. Wilkins busied herself with tomorrow's bread dough, Virginia sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the occasional movements of the child within. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Is this where we belong?" The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her contemplation. A rider was coming fast down the road to the ranch, pushing his horse hard despite the failing light. Virginia rose awkwardly, calling for Matthew as the rider thundered into the yard. Matthew emerged from the house just as the man pulled his lathered horse to a stop. "Jake? What's happened?" The rider, one of Matthew's hands who had been sent to town for supplies, dismounted quickly. "Telegram came for Mrs. Blackwood, boss. Station master said it seemed urgent." Virginia stepped forward, her heart suddenly racing. "For me?" Jake handed her a folded paper. "Yes, madam. From Silverdale." With trembling fingers, Virginia opened the telegram. The message was brief but clear. "Received your letters. Stop. Thomas lost. Devastating. Stop. Please come soonest. Stop. We'll meet stage 1st Tuesday, October. Stop. Michael Blackwood." "It's from Thomas's brother," Virginia said, her voice faint. "He got my letters. He's expecting me in Silverdale." Matthew's expression was carefully controlled. "When?" "1st Tuesday in October. That's less than 2 weeks from now." The implications hung in the air between them. Virginia had written to Michael Blackwood months ago, before she'd ever met Matthew, before the double-R had begun to feel like home. Her plan had always been to reach her brother-in-law's homestead before the baby came, to rely on family during her confinement and early motherhood. Now that plan, which had seemed so uncertain for so long, had suddenly solidified into a real possibility again, and it had arrived just as an alternative future was taking shape. "I see," Matthew said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "We should get your wagon ready then. Make sure you have everything you need for the journey." Virginia looked up at him, confused by his rapid acceptance. "Matthew, it's getting late," he interrupted, turning to Jake. "Get some food from Mrs. Wilkins. You've had a long ride." Without meeting Virginia's eyes again, Matthew strode back into the house, leaving her standing on the porch with the telegram still clutched in her hand. Mrs. Wilkins appeared in the doorway, concern evident on her face. "What's happened?" Virginia handed her the telegram, trying to make sense of Matthew's reaction. "Thomas's brother is expecting me in Silverdale. He wants me to come as soon as possible." The older woman read the message, then looked sharply at Virginia. "And is that what you want? To go to Silverdale?" "Aye." Virginia hesitated. "It was my plan. Michael is the baby's uncle, the only family we have left." Mrs. Wilkins pressed her lips together. "That boy," she muttered, clearly referring to Matthew. "Always assuming he knows what others are thinking." "What do you mean?" "He thinks you've made your choice," Mrs. Wilkins explained. "That you're choosing your original plan over his offer. That's why he walked away just now, trying to make it easier for you by not arguing." Virginia sank back onto the porch bench, suddenly understanding. But I haven't decided anything. Then you'd better tell him that, Mrs. Wilkins advised. Before he convinces himself you're already gone. Virginia found Matthew in his study, standing by the window with his back to the door. He turned when she entered, his expression composed, but his eyes revealing the turmoil beneath. You should get some rest, he said formally. If you're to reach Silverdale by the first Tuesday, you'll need to leave soon. Is that what you think I want? Virginia asked directly. To leave? Matthew's jaw tightened. It's what you planned. Your brother-in-law is expecting you. He's your family. And what about what you asked me? Virginia stepped closer. Does that offer no longer stand because a telegram arrived? Of course it stands, Matthew said, a hint of frustration breaking through his calm facade. But I won't hold you to an answer you haven't given yet. Not when you now have the security you were seeking all along. Virginia felt a surge of clarity. Matthew Ryder, for a smart man, you can be remarkably dense. His eyebrows rose in surprise at her tone. You asked me to marry you, to build a life here, she continued, gaining confidence. You showed me where our home could stand, talked about a future together. Did you think a few lines on a telegram would erase all of that? You thought wrong, Virginia interrupted. Yes, Michael Blackwood is the baby's uncle. Yes, I wrote to him months ago, before I knew you existed. But that doesn't mean I'm obligated to follow through with that plan if a better one has presented itself. Hope flickered in Matthew's eyes. And has it presented itself? Virginia took a deep breath. I believe it has. I've been thinking about your proposal every waking moment since you made it, considering what it would mean for me, for the baby, wondering if I could be happy here, if you could truly accept another man's child, if we could build something real together. She moved closer still, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. And do you know what I've realized? That I feel more at home here, with you, than I have since Thomas died. That when I think of the future, it's your face I see beside me. That the thought of leaving this place, leaving you hurts more than I could have imagined. Matthew's composure finally broke. Virginia, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Are you saying yes? I'm saying that I want to stay, she replied softly. That I want to see if what's growing between us can become the kind of love that lasts a lifetime. That I want my child to know you as its father. So yes, Matthew Ryder, I am saying yes. For a moment, Matthew stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this fragile new reality. Then he reached for her, drawing her gently into his arms, mindful of her belly between them. I never thought I'd have this chance again, he murmured against her hair. To love, to have a family. Virginia leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the safety she'd been seeking for so long. Neither did I. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise of deeper passion to come, but respectful of the boundaries still between them. Virginia responded with equal tenderness, letting herself fully acknowledge the feelings that had been building within her heart. As they drew apart, Matthew kept his arms around her. We should still send a reply to your brother-in-law. Let him know your plans have changed. Virginia nodded. I'll write to him tomorrow, explain everything. Perhaps we can visit Silverdale after the baby comes, when travel is easier. Of course. Matthew brushed a strand of hair from her face. Family is important. The baby should know its uncle. The care in that simple statement, the ready acceptance of her child's connections beyond their new family, confirmed for Virginia that she had made the right choice. When shall we be married? She asked, practical even in this emotional moment. Matthew smiled. As soon as possible. Before the baby comes, if that's what you want. Judge Wilson can perform the ceremony here at the ranch. I'd like that, Virginia said softly. Something simple, with Mrs. Wilkins and your men as witnesses. Speaking of Mrs. Wilkins, Matthew glanced toward the door with a rueful expression. I suspect she's hovering in the hallway, waiting to hear if I've fixed my blunder. As if on cue, a discreet cough sounded from beyond the study door. Virginia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Come in, Mrs. Wilkins. I know you're there. The housekeeper appeared, attempting to look innocent and failing completely. Just checking if anyone wanted coffee. Matthew kept his arm around Virginia's waist. Mrs. Wilkins, Virginia has done me the honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. The older woman beamed, all pretense abandoned. Well, it's about time. When's the wedding? We'll need to prepare food, decorations. Virginia will need a proper dress. The house should be cleaned from top to bottom. As Mrs. Wilkins launched into planning mode, Matthew exchanged an amused glance with Virginia. I think we've created a monster. She's right, though, Virginia replied. There is much to do, and not much time before the baby arrives. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word of the upcoming wedding spread quickly through the territory, bringing visits from neighbors bearing gifts and good wishes. Virginia was touched by the community's acceptance of her, their genuine pleasure in Matthew's newfound happiness. A telegram was sent to Michael Blackwood, explaining Virginia's change in plans and extending an invitation to visit the double R when convenient. His reply came 3 days later, a brief message expressing relief that she had found security and promising to visit in the spring to meet his new nephew or niece. Mrs. Wilkins proved herself a formidable wedding planner, organizing everything from flowers to food with military precision. The women from neighboring ranches rallied around Virginia, helping to alter one of Matthew's late mother's dresses into a suitable wedding gown that accommodated her advancing pregnancy. Through it all, Virginia and Matthew found moments to be alone together, deepening their connection through conversation and shared dreams. They discussed names for the baby, plans for the new house, hopes for the ranch's future. With each passing day, Virginia's certainty grew. This unexpected detour had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with the first hints of autumn coloring the prairie grasses gold. The ceremony was set for noon, allowing time for guests to arrive from distant ranches and return home before dark. As Virginia prepared in her room, Mrs. Wilkins fussed over her appearance, adjusting the creamy lace collar of the adapted gown and arranging Virginia's hair with wildflowers. You look beautiful, child, the housekeeper said, her eyes suspiciously moist. Matthew won't know what hit him. Virginia smiled nervously at her reflection. The woman in the mirror barely resembled the desperate widow who had arrived at the double R 2 months earlier. This woman's cheeks held healthy color, her eyes shone with anticipation rather than fear, and her rounded belly was displayed proudly rather than hidden. I never expected this, she admitted softly. When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. Mrs. Wilkins squeezed her shoulder. Life has a way of surprising us. The good Lord closes one door and opens another. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Jake, who would escort Virginia downstairs in place of a father. Everyone's ready, madam, he said, hat in hand and looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. Mr. Ryder's about to wear a hole in the floor with his pacing. Virginia laughed, the last of her nerves dissipating. We can't have that. Let's not keep him waiting. The main room of the ranch house had been transformed for the occasion. Furniture had been moved to create space for the guests. Wildflowers adorned every surface, and Judge Wilson stood ready before the stone fireplace, Bible in hand. But Virginia saw none of it. Her eyes went immediately to Matthew, standing tall and straight in a new black suit, his face lighting up as she entered the room. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with traditional vows spoken in voices that carried clearly to all assembled. When Matthew slipped a simple gold band onto Virginia's finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, carefully saved all these years, tears finally spilled onto her cheeks. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Wilson declared with evident satisfaction. Matthew, you may kiss your bride. Matthew's kiss was gentle but held promise, a public declaration of his commitment and affection that brought approving cheers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Ryder, Virginia felt a sense of rightness, of coming home at last. The celebration that followed was joyful and boisterous, with abundant food, music, and dancing that continued well into the afternoon. Virginia found herself surrounded by well-wishers, women offering advice on everything from childbirth to managing ranch hands, men congratulating Matthew with hearty backslaps and knowing winks. As the party continued, Matthew drew Virginia aside to a quiet corner of the porch. Happy, Mrs. Ryder? He asked, his voice soft and intimate. Very, she replied honestly, though I'm also exhausted. Your son or daughter seems to be doing a jig of their own. Matthew placed his hand on her belly, his face softening with wonder as he felt the baby's movements. Strong, like its mother, and stubborn, like its new father, Virginia teased. Matthew's expression grew serious. I want you to know, Virginia, that I will love this child with everything I have. It will never know a moment's doubt about its place in my heart. Tears threatened again at the sincerity in his voice. I know you will, she whispered. That's one of the many reasons I love you. It was the first time she had said the words directly, and they hung in the air between them, a new threshold crossed. Matthew's eyes widened slightly, then filled with answering emotion. I love you too, he said simply. More than I thought possible. Their second kiss as husband and wife was deeper, more personal than the ceremonial one had been, a private pledge between two people who had found hope again when they least expected it. The sound of approaching footsteps made them separate reluctantly. Mrs. Wilkins appeared, looking harried. There you are? Everyone's asking for the bride and groom. The Jackson twins want to play a special song, and Mrs. Palmer is making pointed comments about propriety. Matthew laughed, keeping his arm around Virginia's waist. Heaven forbid we disappoint Mrs. Palmer. As they returned to their guests, Virginia caught sight of Elizabeth Palmer watching them with barely concealed envy. She felt a momentary pang of sympathy for the woman who had set her sights on Matthew and lost, but only momentary. The happiness Virginia had found was too precious, too unexpected to tarnish with regret for others' disappointments. The celebration continued until sunset, when the last of the guests departed with final congratulations and promises to visit soon. As twilight settled over the ranch, Virginia found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since speaking their vows. Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder, Matthew said softly, leading her toward the stairs. Virginia smiled, leaning into his strength. Home, she repeated. Yes, that's exactly what this is. 2 weeks after the wedding, Virginia woke in the pre-dawn darkness to sharp pains across her abdomen. For a moment, she lay still, hoping it was just the baby's shifting position. But when another pain gripped her, stronger than the first, she knew. Matthew, she whispered, reaching for her husband's shoulder. Matthew, wake up. He came awake instantly, years of ranch emergencies having trained him to alertness. What is it? Are you all right? The baby's coming, Virginia said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear fluttering in her chest. It was early, not dangerously so, but still nearly 3 weeks before she'd expected. Matthew was out of bed in an instant, pulling on clothes. I'll get Mrs. Wilkins. And send Jake for Dr. Freeman. Virginia nodded, breathing carefully through another contraction. Yes, but don't panic. First babies often take their time. Despite her reassurance, Matthew moved with urgent efficiency, pausing only to light the bedside lamp and press a quick kiss to her forehead before hurrying from the room. Minutes later, Mrs. Wilkins appeared in her nightgown and robe, her silver hair in a long braid down her back. So the little one's decided to join us, has it? She said cheerfully, hiding any concern behind practical energy. Let's get you comfortable. We have plenty of time to prepare. Virginia had been right about first babies taking their time. Hours passed as her labor progressed slowly but steadily. Mrs. Wilkins proved herself an experienced birth attendant, offering comfort, practical help, and no-nonsense encouragement as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. Matthew was banished to the hallway but refused to go farther, pacing outside the door and entering briefly whenever Virginia called for him. His face was drawn with concern each time he saw her pain, but he masked it quickly, offering strength and calm presence when she needed it most. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Freeman had arrived from town, his presence bringing additional reassurance. After examining Virginia, he declared everything to be progressing normally, if somewhat slowly. The baby's positioned well, he told them, just taking its time to make an entrance. As evening approached, Virginia's labor intensified. The pain became all-consuming, leaving little room for thought or conversation. She was vaguely aware of Matthew holding her hand, of Mrs. Wilkins wiping her brow with cool cloths, of Dr. Freeman's calm instructions. But mostly, she was focused inward, on the tremendous work her body was doing. You're doing beautifully, Virginia, Dr. Freeman encouraged as twilight deepened outside the windows. It won't be much longer now. The final stage of labor came with a sudden rush of new energy. Virginia found reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, bearing down with each contraction, focused entirely on bringing her child into the world. I can see the head, Mrs. Wilkins announced excitedly. Dark hair, just like its mama. Matthew's grip on Virginia's hand tightened. You're amazing, he whispered. So strong. With a final, tremendous effort, Virginia felt the baby slip from her body, followed by an instant of breathless silence. Then came the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, a strong, indignant cry that filled the room. A girl. Dr. Freeman announced, quickly checking the infant before placing her on Virginia's chest. A perfect little girl. Virginia gazed down at her daughter in wonder. The tiny face was red and wrinkled, crowned with a shock of dark hair, her fists clenched as she continued to protest her entry into the world. Hello, little one, Virginia whispered, tears streaming down her face. We've been waiting for you. Matthew leaned close, his own eyes wet as he gently touched the baby's hand with one finger. When the tiny fingers reflexively gripped his, a sob escaped him. She's beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Perfect. As Mrs. Wilkins and the doctor discreetly handled the final stages of the birth, Virginia and Matthew remained transfixed by their daughter, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the perfect little features, the strength in the tiny body. What shall we call her? Matthew asked softly. Virginia looked up at her husband, seeing in his face all the love and wonder she felt herself. I was thinking. Sarah Hope. Matthew's breath caught. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, Sarah Hope Ryder, he said, testing the name. It's beautiful. Perfect for her. Virginia reached for his hand. Is it truly all right to name her after? After my first wife? Matthew finished. His eyes held nothing but gratitude. It's more than all right, Virginia. It's a gift I never expected. He touched the baby's cheek gently. Sarah would be honored. And hope. Because that's what she represents, Virginia explained. Hope for the future. Hope that brought us together. Later, after Dr. Freeman had departed with promises to return the next day, after Mrs. Wilkins had helped Virginia bathe and change into a fresh nightgown, after Sarah Hope had demonstrated a healthy appetite at her mother's breast and fallen into contented sleep, Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, simply watching his wife and daughter. I never thought I'd have this again, he said quietly. A family. This feeling. Virginia reached for his hand. Neither did I. When Thomas died, I thought my chance at happiness died with him. And now I know that the heart has room for more than one love, she said. That happiness can find you even when you're not looking for it. Matthew leaned forward to kiss her gently. I love you, Virginia Ryder. And I love you, Matthew Ryder. Between them, Sarah Hope slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge, even if only instinctively, that she was deeply loved, protected, and cherished. Spring came to the Double R with a burst of new life. Prairie flowers carpeted the grasslands, calves frolicked in the pastures, and the creek ran full and fast with snowmelt from the mountains. Construction on the new house by the cottonwoods was well underway, with Matthew overseeing every detail to ensure it would be perfect for his growing family. Virginia sat on the porch of the main house, watching as Matthew approached from the barn, little Sarah Hope bundled securely against his chest. At 5 months old, the baby was thriving, a happy, healthy child with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Matthew had taken to fatherhood with natural ease, often carrying Sarah with him around the ranch, introducing her to horses and cattle, telling her stories of the land that would one day be partly hers. Look who's awake, Matthew called as he climbed the porch steps. She didn't want to miss the excitement. Virginia smiled, reaching for her daughter. The stage isn't due for hours yet. She'll be ready for her nap long before Uncle Michael arrives. Today marked an important milestone, the first visit from Thomas's brother, Michael Blackwood. He had written regularly since learning of Sarah's birth, expressing his eagerness to meet his niece and see Virginia settled in her new life. Now, with spring making travel easier, he had finally made the journey from Silverdale. Are you nervous? Matthew asked, sitting beside Virginia and watching as Sarah contentedly snuggled against her mother. A little, Virginia admitted. It's been over a year since I last saw Michael at Thomas's funeral, and so much has changed. Matthew took her free hand, squeezing it gently. He'll see how happy you are. How loved. Virginia leaned against her husband's shoulder, grateful once again for the unexpected twist of fate that had brought them together. I am happy, more than I ever thought possible again. The sound of approaching hoofbeats announced a rider coming fast up the road. Matthew stood, shading his eyes against the spring sunshine. That's Jake. Looks like he's in a hurry. The ranch hand pulled his horse to a stop in front of the house, excitement evident on his face. Boss, Mrs. Ryder. The stage broke down about 5 miles back. But there's a gentleman walking this way, says he's Mr. Blackwood. Virginia rose quickly, handing Sarah back to Matthew. He walked 5 miles rather than wait for repairs. Said he was too eager to meet his niece to sit around waiting. Jake reported with a grin. Matthew laughed. Sounds like determination runs in the Blackwood family. Jake, ride back and offer assistance to the other passengers. We'll watch for Mr. Blackwood. They didn't have to watch long. Within 20 minutes, a tall figure appeared on the road, walking with purpose despite what must have been a tiring journey. Virginia stepped off the porch, emotion tightening her throat as she recognized Thomas's older brother. Michael Blackwood looked much as she remembered, tall and lean like Thomas had been, with the same warm brown eyes and easy smile. His face lit up when he saw Virginia, and he quickened his pace. Virginia, look at you blooming like a prairie rose. He embraced her warmly, then stepped back to study her face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, for his smile widened. Marriage agrees with you, sister. It does, Virginia agreed, turning to where Matthew stood with Sarah. Michael, this is my husband, Matthew Ryder. And this, her voice softened with pride, is your niece, Sarah Hope. Michael approached almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the baby. May I? He asked, holding out his arms. Matthew transferred Sarah carefully to her uncle's embrace. The baby looked up at the new face with solemn curiosity, then broke into a gummy smile that made Michael laugh in delight. She has Thomas's smile, he said softly, the same crinkle at the corners of her eyes. Virginia felt tears well up at the observation, something she hadn't noticed herself, but recognized as true the moment he said it. Yes, she does. Michael looked up, including both Virginia and Matthew in his gaze. Thank you for this, for writing to me, for allowing me to be part of her life, even from a distance. After losing Thomas, well, knowing his child was coming was a comfort I can't describe. Matthew placed his arm around Virginia's waist. Family is important. Sarah should know her uncle and the legacy of her father. Virginia leaned into her husband's strength, overwhelmed with gratitude for his understanding, his generosity of spirit. To Michael, she said, we want you to be a regular part of our lives. The Double R isn't so far from Silverdale that visits can't be frequent. As they walked toward the house together, Virginia watched her brother-in-law talking animatedly with Matthew, both men already finding common ground in their experiences as ranchers. Sarah, comfortable in her uncle's arms, reached curiously for his beard, making both men laugh. This was what she had hoped for when she set out on her journey west: family, security, a sense of belonging. She had found it, not in the way she expected, but perhaps in the way she needed most. That evening, after a celebratory dinner and hours of conversation during which Michael and Matthew discovered they shared not only ranching experience, but also a love of literature and similar views on territorial politics, Virginia stood in the doorway of Sarah's room, watching as her husband gently tucked their daughter into her crib. Sweet dreams, little one, Matthew whispered, bending to kiss the baby's forehead. Papa loves you. The simple words, spoken with such genuine emotion, made Virginia's heart swell. From the first moment Sarah had been placed in his arms, Matthew had been every inch a devoted father, never once treating her as anything less than his own child. As they retired to their bedroom, Virginia sat at her dressing table, removing pins from her hair. Matthew came to stand behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror's reflection. Happy? He asked, a question that had become something of a ritual between them. Completely, she answered honestly. Seeing Michael with Sarah, watching you together. It feels like everything has come full circle, like all the pieces are finally in place. Matthew began gently brushing her hair, a nightly ritual they both enjoyed. I've been thinking, he said after a moment. The new house will be ready by midsummer. We'll have room for more children, if that's what you want. Virginia turned to face him, taking the brush from his hands and setting it aside. Is that what you want, Matthew? More children. His eyes softened as he cupped her face in his hands. With you? Yes. I want to watch our family grow, see Sarah as a big sister, fill that house with laughter and life. Virginia rose to meet him, her arms circling his neck. Then that's what we'll do. One day at a time, 1 year at a time, we'll build our future together. As Matthew's lips met hers in a kiss that still held the power to make her heart race, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperation to hope, from solitude to family, from grief to love, it had been a path of unexpected turns and surprising destinations. The pregnant woman who had nothing but hope had found not just a family to believe in, but a love story that was still being written, day by day, in the heart of the Wild West.